travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the program. We'll get into the inflation conversation in just a moment. The latest from Brait and Virgin Active as well. A lot going on there. Also updates for you, of course, on the situation regarding the Middle East. But I do just want to take care of a little bit of important business from last night's show. You heard Sipho Patyana, the person who at one point looked like he was going to be the chair of ABSA and then wasn't. A complicated story, but in the end, he won a court ruling on Friday in which the court said the Prudential Authority had been wrong to essentially decide on an informal process with no response from him to basically tell ABSA he would not be suitable to be the chair of ABSA. This all, of course, related to sexual harassment allegations while he was at AngloGold Ashanti. No findings ever been made against him in that regard. On the Money Show last night, he made certain claims against Maria Ramos when she was at AngloGold Ashanti, and Nqobile Naidu, who at the time was in charge of the Prudential Authority. This, of course, is the body that regulates banks, essentially has to decide whether or not someone can be a CEO or a chair of a bank. Well, we weren't expecting him to be personal or to make personal claims in what he said last night, but Sipho Patyana did, of course, say it. We did today make contact with Nqobile Naidu. He's no longer at the Reserve Bank, but we did ask him and we did invite him to give a right of reply. He referred us to the South African Reserve Bank, which is where the Prudential Authority sits. We have emailed the South African Reserve Bank. We did so, I understand, fairly early this morning. As yet, no response from them. I made this point last night. I fear we may not get a response from them and thus not be able to get the other side. I fear we may only get the other side, if at all, through court papers at some point.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, you may have a view on that or something else. 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. Well, more evidence today that if we are going to have a lower inflation target, this is the moment. Stats SA reporting consumer price inflation for May coming in at 2.8%. That's for the second month in a row. Meat prices, some food prices are higher. Coffee inflation finally coming down. Isaac Matsejo is an economist at Nedbank. Isaac, good evening. Good to talk to you again on The Money Show. Food prices still relatively high, or food price inflation still relatively high, I should say. Meat inflation, 4.4%. Is the foot and mouth outbreak already having an impact on meat prices? It does look like it.
Good evening, Stephen. It seems like we're starting to see the initial impact of the F&D outbreak. But remember this, the current outbreak is still relatively contained, and we're not likely to see the sort of impact we saw with avian flu in 2023 and 2024. That's my expectation at least.
There's been a lot of variability in vegetable prices. In November last year, vegetable inflation was down to negative 2.6%. Vegetables were getting cheaper. Now their inflation rate is 10%. I mean, is this just the impact of rain or something else?
Yeah, number one is the base effect. So, due to the very low numbers last year, small increases this year can really bump up the year-on-year figure. But, at the start of this year, you'll remember that in some key growing areas, there was flooding and a lot of crop was lost. So that likely is coming through already in the prices.
Overall inflation is low, 2.8%. I mean, it's a kind of wonderful place to be. Normally you'd expect interest rates to start coming down even more dramatically than they have at this point. Fuel prices are going to go up. There's an increase in the fuel levy. The situation in the Middle East has pushed oil prices up. Could this kind of be, this is a strange phrase, the peak of low inflation? Could inflation be about to start creeping up, administered prices, etc.?
Well, Stephen, we've played around with a number of scenarios and lately incorporating the effects of the conflict in the Middle East via a weaker rand and higher oil prices. And our numbers still point to inflation averaging below 4%. For throughout the year. I mean, in the base case scenario where we see, the impact of the war being contained, relatively contained, i.e., we don't see the rand or oil prices increasing significantly from current levels. We've got inflation averaging 3.5. And if we sort of go with what we would call a high-risk scenario, or worst case, I would say, inflation is still slightly, below 4%. So it seems that, price setting in the South African economy has changed structurally over, the past few decades, which would point to the success of the Reserve Bank's inflation targeting policy.
Isaac Motshekgo, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Economist at Nedbank.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
The owners of Virgin Active New Look and a big portion of the Premier Group Brait reporting today. Their net asset value per share rose by 6% year on year for the year to the end of March. Virgin Active makes up around 2/3 of Brait's assets. It reported a 13% increase in revenue. Brait is looking to list Virgin Active on the JSE in the next 18 months. Peter Hayward-Butt is the CEO at Brait. Peter, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. The gym business has been fascinating in a sort of post-pandemic world. You've been able to increase your numbers in South Africa slightly, but are you finding it quite tough to keep people as members of Virgin Active here?
Evening, Stephen, and evening to your listeners. Look, as you say, it's been quite a ride through COVID with the gym business, but I think the main thing we are looking at is enhancing the investor proposition for members. So, why should they come? And it's all about the product, the state of the gym. So we spent a huge amount of money, not just in SA, but internationally, on upgrading our gyms and refurbishing them, etc. And yes, we have seen increased members. We've increased prices across the globe. And that's led to, as you mentioned, a decent increase in revenue and a 45% increase in EBITDA. So, relatively pleasing performance over the year.
In South Africa, you ended up with 10,000 more members than you started with. But you did say you're battling a little bit with membership terminations. Are people giving up gym altogether? Is it too expensive in our environment? Is there some competition that they're going to? Are they just maybe getting to February and deciding they were wrong in January?
I think an element of all of those, I think they fall into two buckets. I think one is, consumers that are under financial pressure who at the end of the month, when you run a direct debit order, there's no money in their account and, they can't afford it. And I would say that's probably roughly 50 to 60% of terminations. And then obviously you get people who, start off at the beginning of the year with great resolutions to see it through and who after 2 or 3 months say it's not for them. We can't really... the first one is very difficult to counter. The second one is all about membership engagement and trying to get them back into the gym and give them a program which is suited to them and keep them engaged, really.
I mean, it seems that are you getting different experiences in different markets? Your other markets seem to be doing okay on that score. I mean, certainly I know around the world, gym is a big business at the moment for various reasons.
Yeah, so other international businesses, South Africa makes up probably 35% of the revenues of the business. So 65% is the UK, Italy, and the Asia Pacific. Each market is different. For example, Italy, we've got a fantastic franchise. It's very well capitalized. We spent a lot of money on it pre-COVID and through COVID. And so there, the churn rates have been lower. The UK is, I think, in a very similar place to where we find ourselves in terms of the consumers under pressure. We still need to refurbish a lot of the gyms. And improving membership engagement. So I would say in South Africa and the UK, it's been relatively tough. Asia Pacific, we saw a 16% increase in the revenues there. So, that's been a relatively good outcome for the business.
You want to list Virgin Active in 18 months or so. Is this a good period to do that, especially if you need to recapitalize? You get some money in, obviously.
Yeah, look, from our perspective, when we took over Grootes as the manager, I'm going to say 5 years ago now, we did say that the whole strategy was to unwind and distribute all the value to the underlying shareholders. The one way to do that, in the case of Virgin Active, would be to list it and then to unbundle those shares to Grootes shareholders. So we are still on track to do that. I think the first window for that would be just over 12, 14 months' time. But there's a lot of lead time that needs to go into an IPO. So we are starting work on that, but it'll depend on where the markets are at the time. But yes, that is still the strategy, Stephen, to do that.
In the UK, you want to sell your New Look chain, and I think you've been talking about this for quite some time. As you say, the British economy, like ours, in a difficult spot. Clothing retail, furiously competitive. Are you confident you'll find a buyer?
Yeah, look, as I mentioned, we took over the Grootes business 5 years ago when New Look was, on its way down, and it's continued to be a very tough place to play. As I mentioned, the UK consumer's under pressure. The high street has been a disaster, quite frankly, for all fashion retailers. You see one a week going out of business. I think the New Look business is still a number one brand in women's wear, continues to be. Still has just under, not far short of £1 billion of revenue. So it's a very big business. The strategy of that business has really turned to focusing on its digital business as opposed to its bricks and mortar business. So it is scaling back its bricks and mortar business, has invested a lot of money and time and effort into increasing its digital platform offering. And that's really what we're looking to sell to a potential purchaser probably over the next 12 months. Peter
Hayward-Butt, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. CEO at Grootes.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Confirmation today from the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, the organisation that oversees Formula One, in case you were wondering, that they've accepted proposals that would see Kyalami upgrade to Grade 1 status. In other words, they'll be able to hold a Grand Prix here if they implement everything they're planning. Nqobile Ndlovu is a sports business expert. Nqobile, good evening. We all know the sports minister wants a Grand Prix here. How significant is this move?
It's a significant move, Stephen, in that it allows us the pathway to then move on to get into Grade 1 status, bidding for Formula One and finally bringing Formula One in here. And just to point out as well, above and beyond the sports minister, it's also probably more Patricia de Lille who would be even more thrilled at it, because from a tourism point of view, to bring in huge numbers as well.
I mean, the 2 times I've ridden on Kyalami on my bicycle, the road's been smoother than almost anything else you'll find in Joburg at the moment. Does there need to be a lot more work done on it to make it acceptable? I mean, would someone, the owners, I presume, have to put in a lot of money?
They do. So the current racetrack at the moment is at Grade 2 status, but to get it to Grade 1 status, it'll cost, and the estimates are somewhere between $7 and $10 million. So it'll cost a pretty penny in terms of just over 100 million, or around about 170 million rand. So it's quite a lot of money, all the running up to 200 million if things are overrun in cost. And the reason for that is because the vehicles that drive on the current Kyalami circuit for things like the Kyalami 9 Hour and other events, they're not as fast as Formula One cars, which can be up to 30% faster than Kyalami 9 Hour cars. So you need a runway long enough for the vehicles to, if they run off and hit a barrier, there's enough distance between the track and the barrier. So that's one. And then there's things like drainage and other facilities that would be required to get it up to Grade 1 status. Now, what Formula One has said is that they accept the proposal which says we want to get from Grade 2 to Grade 1. That doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, cool, once you're at Grade 1, we will definitely accept you, and at what time do we accept you? Because let's not forget that just because you're at Grade 1 status, you still then need to pay your way to play the game, which means there's hosting fees required, and still need to take into account that your calendar takes, your calendar is usually decided a year in advance, and most circuits have about a cycle of 4 to 5 years during which they're in the Formula One calendar. So there's a lot of work to do beyond, this almost 200 million rand.
The big argument in our favour, I'd say there are 2. The one is time zones, because you don't need to hold the thing at midnight like you did, where was it, Las Vegas? I think they had to do that. And the other is surely the importance of hosting it in Africa. And isn't that surely a strong argument?
And absolutely, we've also got nostalgia, going for us. Formula One in South Africa at Kyalami was one of the best race Grand Prix until the 90s, when unfortunately the cost of running it just became unsustainable, and it was after the death of Ayrton Senna that they required that you upgrade it even more, and at that time the costs were too much. But we have all sorts of things running for us. We have the Lewis Hamilton push, although unfortunately don't think he'll still be racing by the time it comes here. We have the Nelson Mandela story. We have the great wildlife. South Africa's got a great story to tell, and also the time zones, as you said, work perfectly for us. But also the design of the track is fantastic. If you look at other tracks that are boring, like Monaco and so on, we've got a good-looking track.
Indeed, we do. Nqobile and Ndlovu, thanks very much indeed. Much smoother, as I say, than all the other roads visitors will see. With The Money Show, it's 3 minutes after 6.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Chris Stewart's portfolio manager at 91. Chris, good evening. Inflation data out today. Inflation in South Africa is still fairly benign, despite what you would think are some risks to inflation in the future.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. The inflation numbers today, very little by way of surprise, perhaps a slight uptick in food inflation, a little higher than anticipated due to a couple of, idiosyncratic supply side effects that will pass. But beyond that, at 2.8%, the inflation number is good. The core inflation number remains good. And the environment is probably ripe for the central bank to, accelerate their noises around wanting to bring us down to a point target for inflation at 3% rather than the rather wide inflation band that we have by global standards today.
It's interesting, of course, just looking ahead, because you would think oil prices are higher. There'll be a fuel levy, so that will go up. Food prices and everything else sort of gets affected by fuel prices. A lot depends on what happens in the Middle East. As always, what happens there affects us in some way.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty in the current environment, and I think that's probably been driving the behavior of monetary policy makers across the world. We've got the US Fed speaking over the next couple of days, and there's, largely expected that they will stand pat, much to the disappointment of the President of the United States, who would, of course, like them to cut rates again. And they're standing pat for exactly the reasons you mentioned. There's still the uncertain impact of tariffs. We spoke last week that, the US inflation print had remained quite benign, and that the impact of inflation of increased tariffs hadn't yet manifested. Now, maybe it doesn't manifest at all. I'd be surprised. It's probably just going to take some time to come through. Plus, we've got, obviously an oil price that has escalated, nearly 20-odd%. Well, WTI up 22% this month. So, oil prices going up sharply on the back of what may or may not prove to be transitory type events in the Middle East. And that, as we know, has inflationary impacts across the globe. So the outlook remains tough, but the current data points are looking pretty decent, and what's within our control, I guess, is looking quite good.
It's interesting to, I hate to have this sort of speculation, what would really scare the markets? Trump saying today, the US president saying today that he may or may not directly attack Iran. Iran would respond. Of course, they've said today that if the US were to do that, it would be a very serious mistake. I presume all of that, if any of those things were to occur, that would rattle markets far more than we've seen so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think the reaction of markets thus far to, the conflagration of events in the Middle East has been fairly sanguine. And, is that because there's a view that, I guess, the US will flex its muscles, Iran will cave, and this festering problem will again disappear for a couple of years before it flares up again? Or is there something more sinister at foot? Are we going to see the US fully getting involved in this conflict? And I think if that's the case, then, perhaps we do see a more dramatic reaction from markets. As I say, the main reaction thus far has been in the oil price, and that's the obvious first casualty of these sort of events. But beyond that, if this escalates into something far more significant in the Middle East, then I think sooner or later markets are going to have to take cognizance of this.
Chris Stewart, thanks very much indeed, portfolio manager at 91. More on that aspect of all of this in about 20 minutes or so. There's so many different things to look at. Looking forward to a conversation with Mark Barnes in a few minutes. He suggests that South Africa is reaching a sort of turning point and that things could be about to change for the good, I should say. Looking forward to that as well. It's you with The Money Show. It's just gone 6:30.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
We're good to hear from you this evening on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. Lots to talk about. No response, as I say, from the Reserve Bank, from Nqobile and the Sipho Patiana claims of last night. Formula One coming to South Africa. I have to say, at some point, I think there's going to be a debate around whether it'll cost us money or get us money. And I can just imagine the sort of TV package before the Formula One in Johannesburg showing you, frankly, the wonders of South Africa. I'd like to think they'll include our test and rugby team, our cricket and rugby teams, and maybe Mamelodi Sundowns in that. But I also do wonder if at some point we're going to see some opposition coming to it. And I can just imagine the sort of argument. It costs us money. It's not really going to get us anything. Formula One is not something we should celebrate, etc. I mean, for most of my life, I've been someone who's been opposed to Formula One or just not really into it. Slowly, I think just because I want to spend some time with people who do watch it all the time, I'm slowly being sucked in. Maybe it's because they drive hybrids or something.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
A suggestion today in Business Live that South Africa might be slightly closer to a sort of turning point that you think, and that the economy may be about to turn. There have been all sorts of conversations lately about the definition of employment, the informal sector, etc. Normally, though, I'd be a little concerned if someone said things are about to get better. I'd be a little worried if maybe they're not cynical enough. But the person who says it is Mark Barnes. He's the Executive Chair and CEO at the Purple Group. You may recall his time at the Post Office. Mark, good evening. Why do you believe we may finally have hit bottom and things may be about to turn?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for the opportunity and excuse my cold. Well, I'm not saying it's because things are good. I'm saying it's because things are that bad. Okay. And so we are at a point where survival is coming to the fore. We will get to a point. You always get to a point where you sort of don't think it can get much worse, and then you set your differences aside and work together. And I saw evidence of that over this long weekend. I did a bit of driving around. And there are some places where the community has self-evidently said, we're not going to let this go. We're going to, and they've come together. And there is, I'd almost describe it as brutal evidence. Absolutely clean railway lines, functional pine forests that have been trimmed according to their, the years of growth and the sort of oxygen they need and sunlight they need at the roots. All that sort of stuff, really world class. Now, why is that? Well, I think because there's different localized leadership. And so what I'm saying is there are some examples that people can look to other than preeminent demise and say, well, what happens if we try and do that? What happens if we clear this litter and make it a little soccer field or a school? Because it's working for some people. Okay. So, I think this isn't born out of hope and promise. It's born out of desperation that we come together. And the last point I'd make is if you look into the investment world, the value investors look a bit deeper and they go, well, is there any value here? Is there real value here and we'll weather the storm? And they always outperform the speculators. So that's the mood I found myself in, unusually.
You're not the first person actually in recent times to say to me, I've been driving around South Africa and I feel a bit more cheerful about things. I wonder, 10 years ago, there would be a story about different parts of a community. In our society, often these would be across racial lines, but people in a small town working together on a road or something, or famously, I always found this quite strange, working together to stop the name change of Mthatha to Mthatha and to turn it back to Grams. Now, I think that happens maybe so often that we don't remark on it anymore because it's become commonplace. People have learned from each other about how to do it.
Yeah. Also, if you bother to go down to the ground, okay, if you bother to find yourself amongst the people on the ground, I'm sorry, there are more people smiling than crying, okay, at a sort of engagement level across so many other barriers that could divide us. People are starting to say, listen, have you thought of, could we? People are starting to say we, you know, and I think the major divides are in political alliances, not in factual projects. Okay, where you know, when you've got to get down and build a road, or when you've got to, you know, clear or build a school or whatever it is, there is common purpose there, which is absent in the political dimensions and coalitions which spend their lives under threat of each other's accusations and defenses instead of focusing on the work at hand. And so I've just found if you get out of the damn car and you speak to the guy and he goes, yeah, man, you know, I'm selling these things and I make a bit of a this and, you know, it's not falling to pieces and we want to be friends. We've had enough of the divide. That's where I am. Yeah.
Is it maybe also quite a deep understanding learnt over time that government is not going to provide?
Yeah, I think that's become accepted. And the polls are close, okay? We've got the municipal elections next year and we've got the government elections in 3 years' time. And I think people are not going to vote with their loyalty. They're going to vote for their expectations and deliveries. And I think that's what... And I think people are changing their definition of success. The definition of success used to be, you know, get wealth quickly. Now it's build a life. You know, when I was driving with some guys in the property business, we went through bordering Johannesburg, and he's saying, you see that building over there? It used to be a this. I see it as a that. And I reckon, and he sort of talked me through the economics of one particular building. And you know, you sort of need to talk internal rates of return of 3 times, 4 times inflation. And you start going, okay, that's because someone's had enough. That's because the price has got down to the value basement, to the value foundation. Now, you know, and so people, and I say, but don't you realize where this place is? He says, yeah, but then there's the one across the road. A friend of ours just invested in the one down there. And these nodes of value recognition might just convince all the naysayers to put aside their political drivers and come together apolitically to build something. And if that doesn't happen in Johannesburg soon enough, it's going to go under administration. That'll be the only solution.
No, sure. Mark Barnes, thanks very much indeed. Really interesting. Executive Chair, CEO at the Purple Group, and of course, you know his time in the public sector as well. I do think that one of the great lessons of the last few years across all communities, and maybe richer communities have learnt this last, in fact, is that government will not provide. That's kind of the message. Was that certainly the message, let me be careful here, outside the Western Cape? I think I do need to be fair on that. And obviously there are plenty of places in the Western Cape that will feel as if government will not provide for them too. But I do wonder if maybe there's a change in the mood or something, or just a change of approach. Actually, we need to do this. But I sort of stand by the point that I think maybe in richer communities where you know things still work because you can pay for them, the idea of getting your hands dirty hasn't yet started to come through, and I'd include myself in that.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, the US President Donald Trump saying this evening the US has, as he puts it, complete control of the skies over Iran, and that he may or may not attack Iran directly. Israel, of course, continues its attacks on Iran. Iran has said that US strikes on Iran would be a huge mistake. Sanisha Pakarisamy is the chief economist at Momentum Investments. Sanisha, good evening. I really appreciate the time. There's so many different things to look through. Markets first slumping when Israel launched these attacks on Iran, and Iran responded. Oil prices jumped and then slid back a little. I mean, markets surely aren't going to take this in their stride. Depends what happens, obviously.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Yes, I think initially we saw the typical response like we usually do when there is conflict in the Middle East that rears its ugly head every now and then. So we saw the typical safe haven assets climbing like gold, 10-year U.S. Treasuries, the U.S. dollar, even though it wasn't by much, but you did actually see some reaction there. And that basically showed that markets were in a typically risk-off phase as, we don't really know the direction of escalation or de-escalation between Israel and Iran. There was that initial dip in equity markets. I would say that, the equity markets that had a lot of energy exposure tended to be a little bit more a bit more protected than what we had from some of the other indices, especially with the airlines all kind of closing that airspace within the Middle East. We saw some of those aviation stocks, diving quite a bit. We even saw a reaction in what we would call the fear gauge of Wall Street, the VIX index, which is the volatility in equity markets. That picked up, I think it spiked at around 22 points, but then it fell back down to 18. So I think we're going to see this ebbing and flowing of market risk as the conflict either hottens up or we see signs of de-escalation coming through.
I mean, it's so difficult to sort of pick through the rhetoric. There was a time when what the US president said kind of gave you an indication of what would happen in a situation like this, and you could tell immediately if they wanted to, strange word, de-escalate or not. Now, I have no idea what it means. And isn't that a problem for markets?
And I think this is part and parcel of not always understanding U.S. President Donald Trump's strategy. It would make sense that this is a market that they shouldn't really get involved in if their main aim is to consolidate power within the Western Hemisphere, is to concentrate on issues in the Indo-Pacific. And this would have been, one of these almost sideshows for the U.S. to not get fully involved in, because it does actually water down their resources, in enabling them to actually gain control in other parts of the world. So one would expect them to kind of take a step back on it. And again, I think we're privy to this environment where we're not quite sure which direction the U.S. administration is going to take. Now, a lot has been said that Iran wouldn't necessarily attack U.S. infrastructure, given that the Iranian ally base is very weak at this point in time. If you think about Hamas in Syria, the Houthis, Hezbollah, many key military key leaders have been taken out in the last couple of months. And that means that, Iran's allies are not as strong as what they used to be. And so, going up against the U.S. Could be a mistake in that kind of regard.
I presume if there is an escalation one way or another, if the U.S. does strike Iran, or Iran strikes a U.S. target, or Israel tries to send in ground forces, or does a deliberate hit on the Ayatollah Khamenei, that would probably have a bigger impact on the markets than the impact we've already seen?
Indeed. I think there are a couple of routes that this could get worse. The first is if the Iran-Israel issue spills over into a broader regional conflict. Perhaps that includes, major superpowers like the U.S. If, for example, Iran decides to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, there's a couple of reasons as to why we don't think that that is the base case. But given that that strait is responsible for between 25 and 30% of global oil supply, we could see quite a sharp reaction in the international price of oil. And that would be, quite difficult for inflation to come down in an environment where global oil prices are high. We're in a protectionist environment where tariffs are also adding to inflationary pressures. So I think in those kind of examples where we get a broadening out of the conflict, especially where China becomes involved, remember that China gets quite a lot of their oil supply from Iran. And so if that Strait of Hormuz is shut down, that also tends to cut off China's oil supply. And that could then rope in China as a major economic power into some kind of conflict like this. And that, of course, would then lead to further market tensions. And we could actually see, further sell-offs in global financial markets. So there are a couple of routes that this could potentially get worse from here if escalations do continue between Israel and Iran involving other major global superpowers.
And the US dollar, a safe haven in normal times. Certainly the rand seemed to weaken against the dollar at first and still is a little weak-ish. But they're still seeing sort of lots of opinion on Bloomberg, for example, that, the dollar is still expected to weaken over time. And that's because of Trump.
It is indeed because of Trump. So I think, there's a couple of reasons why, the dollar outlook is not that clear. So typically you would expect the US dollar and US treasuries to strengthen in times when global markets are risk off. But we saw the exact opposite taking place on Liberation Day when the tariffs were announced in that week that followed. We actually saw those markets moving in the opposite direction. And that's because at that point in time, investors were also cottoning on to the fact that many of Trump's economic policies that he was putting forward could actually be very negative for the fiscal and debt dynamics of the United States, coupled with further inflation risks. And I think that's when markets started to be quite concerned about, the US dollar as a value in the face of deteriorating debt fiscal dynamics in the U.S. economy. Now, we've seen some of those, nervous jitters embodied by the gold price continuing to pick up. So we've seen that emerging market central banks over the last 3 years have really gone in a big way to purchase gold. And that has been on the back of them trying to diversify their foreign exchange reserves away from the US dollar. So essentially what happened back in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. went quite hard at Russia and sanctioned quite a lot of their foreign exchange reserves. A lot of that is now sitting in a Belgium clearinghouse. Emerging market central banks, I think, got quite nervous by this move and decided to rather diversify into, actual gold bullion that they can then keep in a vault rather than having, sanctions being applied to their own FX reserves. I think that was just another case in point where investors are starting to look away from the US dollar.
Sanisha, thanks very much indeed. So much to look at here. Sanisha Pakarasamy, Chief Economist at Momentum Investments. You with The Money Show, 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour. We'll talk about water, its importance in, I fear, international conflict. Graham Codrington standing by to talk to you about that. So much to talk about when we look at the issue around water. Your consumer ninja, Wendy Nola, talking about what happens when a company you absolutely rely on, they provide a service. I mean, imagine if you just don't have internet and you can't get it to work. Imagine all of those problems as well. And imagine that you have that kind of issue, then that's going to be a major, major issue. We'll talk about that in the next little while. And your shapeshifter this evening is a fascinating journey from basically being a chartered accountant, doing the whole bit, working at corporate banks and everything, and actually going into the beauty business. Mateba Ngwenya is the founder of Beauty on Tap. Get it? App. Looking forward to that this evening as well.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
Business Unusual. Well, we've been dealing with load shedding for years and years and years, and it seems to slowly be receding. But more and more, there are issues around water shedding. And you'll know there are now parts of Joburg that can be without water for a long period of time before it even makes the news headlines today. But a fresh water supply is a problem for more than 80% of the world's population. And a lot of businesses, things like AI that will rely on fresh water, haven't actually made much provision for it. Graham Codrington is the head of Today Tomorrow. He joins us now. Graham, good evening. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, but we are seeing more almost international conflicts around water.
Absolutely, Stephen. And I thought bringing the business unusual theme, we've obviously got a lot of talk about war and imminent conflict around the world, but maybe a story that people missed last month when India and Pakistan had those few days of tension. There was cross-border clashes taking place. India did something really, really interesting and unusual and probably damaging. They blocked the water supply of the Chenab River, which flows through India into Pakistan. And for many years, decades, I would guess, they've had an agreement about water. And India gave notice in April that they were tearing up the agreement. And then in May, when that cross-border conflict happened, they switched off the water and for 24 hours just shut the water supply on the Indian side. And then, probably even worse, they opened all the sluice gates in the dam and flooded the valley down the Chenab River, causing massive devastation downstream. In other words, they used, and it might be the first time, I think, that water has been deliberately used as a weapon of cross-border conflict. But 45 countries, as far as I can see in the research I did, 45 countries had some form of water-related conflict in the last 12 months. And that's not just developing economies. That also happened. People might remember the story of water in California. When Trump became president, a week after becoming president, he released a whole lot of water in Northern California, saying that it should have flowed down towards Los Angeles to help with the fires. Didn't do that, in fact. But water. You know, we often have too much of it. We mainly don't have enough of it. And it seems like it might also be part of wars and weaponization in the future as well. It is quite a topic, isn't it?
It is. I mean, water everywhere, but not a drop for AI to drink. I hadn't realized this, but computer centers need it too.
Well, more than we imagine. So data centers for cloud services, and now in particular generative AI. You know, every time you ask ChatGPT to give you an answer to a question or create one of these cartoonish images, there's a massive call on a computer somewhere in the world, not your own computer, but somewhere else. And those computers get exceptionally hot. And in fact, they use water to cool them down. And unfortunately, you can't use seawater, which would be amazing if we could drink seawater, no problem, right? But you can't use salted or sulfurized water to cool these data centers down. And they use a hang of a lot of essentially drinking water to keep themselves cool. And then that water is not usable for drinking by human consumption. So a lot of extra energy, but also, and I don't think a lot of people know this, a lot of additional fresh water being used. And so, again, if you're looking at this in a variety of different ways, it isn't just about water shedding and the potential of certain cities. Cape Town had their near day zero a few years ago. Mexico City is under stress at the moment. Most Indian cities are reasonably water stressed. Johannesburg's, creaking a little bit at the seams when it comes to the water infrastructure. But I think it's a much bigger issue than that. And I'm concerned that a lot of businesses are not necessarily thinking through what the implications would be if water became a problem, not just in the building that they've got their offices, but for their cloud services, their data centers, and for their logistics and supply chain issues as well.
There's a company called Water Ledger here in South Africa. They seem to be managing water in an interesting way.
Well, I was fascinated by this. I attended a conference a number of weeks ago, and they were trying to highlight some very smart and business unusual South African companies. And I had never heard of Water Ledger before, but it's a South African company that's taken a whole lot of very technical stuff. I would not have put this alongside water because it's got to do with blockchain technology, smart contracting that can be put into those blockchain type technologies. It's tokenization of water supply, all sorts of things that the techie people would understand. And the essence of the story here is that one of the biggest problems in any water system is obviously a water system involves how much water are people using, and then where are the sources of water. But in between those two things, there's the supply. And anybody living in any city in South Africa will know that there's a lot of wastage of leaking pipes and dripping taps and overflowing drains and so on. And if you can identify exactly where those leakages take place, and you can then also certify how secure your water supply system is, this actually makes a huge difference in the system. And in fact, the biggest water savings available anywhere in the world are actually the water savings involved in the delivery system itself. And it's an amazing South African story because these guys have worked out how to use fairly smart technology, link it in with some of the latest tech trends like blockchain and so on to sort of certify the system at key points, put the control into the hands of either municipalities or individuals in certain communities and really take control of water supply. And as far as I can see, they're being picked up all over the world, getting contracts left, right, and center in countries all around the world. And maybe their story will become a little bit more famous over the years if they have found a local solution to an international problem.
I mean, it's a massive opportunity here, right? I mean, a massive opportunity if you manage this properly.
Well, yes, I suppose obviously all of us have to be thinking, as we have been thinking over the years in South Africa, of how do we make sure we've got the energy that we need in our homes, in our offices, in our factories. Of course, water is probably a bigger issue. You can kind of survive in an office for a few hours if the electricity goes off. If the water goes off, you've got to send people home. Immediately the toilets are messed up and there's no drinking water. Schools can't survive without water. They have to shut down. So water shedding is a much, much bigger problem potentially than load shedding. But every problem, and this is a constant theme of the business unusual feature, every problem has an opportunity built into it, doesn't it? And as far as looking around the world, water treatment, water supply, and all of the things that are taken up in the water industry is about a $360 billion industry. So we're talking trillions of rands here. And over the next 10 to 15 years, there's the expectation that that would have a 7% annualized growth rate. And, always a customer. So if there's anything that a company could do, like most of us have been able to maybe put solar panels on roofs and hopefully over the next few years be able to sell our excess capacity into the grid. Anybody who can see an opportunity to do something related to water sourcing, water treatment, water desalination, water security, they will find that there is a big market, a growing market, and a forever market in that space. I think water is something we need to be thinking about for threat and for opportunity, and to look at some South African companies that seem to be doing something clever about it as well.
Graham Codrington, thank you so much. Futurist and partner at Tomorrow Today.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Well, I don't know if you realize how important having internet access at your house is to you. And then also having the ability to contact a person, a real live human being, when something goes wrong. A couple of times it's happened where I haven't been able to get my internet service provider to work. The fact that someone's actually responded has been of immense benefit to me. It made me feel a bit better. But Wendy Nola, your consumer ninja, there's a really interesting case of what happens when it goes wrong. Wendy, good evening. You have a person from Milnerton. What happened to her?
Okay, so hi, Stephen. Caitlin De Silva of Milnerton. She wrote to me very recently about her experience with Web Africa. She says, I believe my ongoing issue reflects a broader pattern of poor service and a lack of accountability affecting many. So in March, she submitted a home move request with Web Africa. So they were already her service provider. She wanted to move. She gave them the required notice period. Everything was acknowledged and confirmed. But despite multiple follow-ups to make sure everything was fine, the move never happened. She says, I was left without internet for weeks at my new address, an untenable situation as I work remotely, as do so many of us. After weeks of that, unsurprisingly, Caitlin says she was forced to cancel the service. And then came the insult to injury bit. She says, Web Africa charged me 1,000 Rand, 999 Rand to be exact, cancellation fee, claiming that I failed to submit sufficient proof of address. Yet at no point was I ever informed that the documentation which I did provide was insufficient. She says they refused to take responsibility, continue to reference their terms, and have now closed my support ticket without resolving the issue. Multiple attempts to escalate the matter have been ignored. So as often happens in these cases, what does the person do? Look around. Well, how can I get help? Okay, and I'm one of the things that some people resort to. So I often get this, Stephen, where you have a failure, a service failure, and then it's compounded by a communication failure, which makes everything, as you say, so much worse. Because accidents happen, mistakes happen. We do them as humans. Companies do them because humans are involved. That's okay, but you must be able to communicate. You must be able to get through to get some help. So the communication issue then became almost a bigger issue for her, and apparently for others, as reflected in a lot of Hello Peter complaints about the company that I've read, where she says Web Africa offers no direct customer service lines. You can't pick up the phone and make a call and speak to someone. She says there's only an email system and a poorly monitored WhatsApp chat, leaving customers without real-time support. They also appear to hide critical comments on their social media platforms. She says it's not just about a fee, this 1,000 rand kick in the pants. She says it's about a company refusing to own up to its own failures while leaving customers stranded. I believe this case reflects a systemic issue. And I'm grateful if you could take a closer look. So I did. I sent an email to...
And what did Web Africa say?
Yeah. Well, I on occasion sent emails to the CEO, Sean Knowles, and I must say he's always very quick to respond, as he did in this case. He began by saying the company takes a lot of pride in its customer service, but he said we are aware that we are not perfect and occasionally we get it horribly wrong, as in this case, clearly. He says we acknowledge that Mr. Silva's experience was highly irregular and does not reflect the standard of service that we aim to deliver. So, as for what went wrong here, so her moving home request, including the dates, that all went fine. It was correctly captured in the system, but an invoice for the service was not generated. An anomaly, said Sean, which we acknowledge and will be addressed in processes. Once that issue was identified by our order fulfillment team, we promptly initiated the order with the network provider. The provider responded, stating that a service for the same customer and address were already active under a different internet provider. That's odd. So Caitlin was asked to Caitlin's request was treated incorrectly as a provider switch scheduled for the end of April. She was then asked for proof of it, blah, blah, blah. So it was a series of unfortunate events. We're addressing how the information was incorrect, but by that stage, Caitlin had opted to cancel her service.
Sure. What does she say? I mean, she would have gone through hours and weeks of trying to get this to work, and without internet, you're basically powerless.
Exactly. So you've got to do all of that without internet in your home. So Noor said our customer service systems are designed to route queries based on the current and future status of a customer service. Because the invoice was not generated as expected, her queries were directed to a department not equipped to resolve a specific issue, contributing to the delay. These are all areas we aim to improve on. We acknowledge this was an unusual and unfortunate sequence of events between internal departments and our network providers. We've since issued a credit to bring her account balance to zero, and we extend our sincere apologies to her. So, of course, I went back to Caitlin with that. And, of course, she's happy with the resolution and the writing off of that 1,000 rand cancellation fee, but she's not buying the highly irregular instant bit. She says, before I reached out to you, and this is what companies need to understand, is that, I mean, and I take on cases where somebody has really gone to the nth degree to try and get help on their own. She says, what did you say? I've endured weeks of exhausting back and forth communication with the complaints department. I provided clear evidence and repeatedly requested escalation to senior management. I received only dismissive and unhelpful replies, often implying that I, as the customer, was at fault. It was only after your intervention that Web Africa finally acknowledged their failings. Judging by the volume of frustrated comments on their social media pages and online review platforms, it's evident I'm not alone in experiencing this poor service, delayed support, and ongoing lack of accountability. So, to be fair, Stephen, all communications companies get a deluge of terrible reviews. Given the customer numbers, it's to be expected. They have, huge volume of clients. So, pro rata, there's going to be a lot of complaints. But from where I stand, the mechanisms that they have created for their customers to engage with them when they have an issue are inadequate, to put it extremely mildly. And so you have this compounding problem going on.
Yeah.
And there were other complaints saying the same thing. I don't want to talk to a bot. One said, Maria said, Web Africa's whole website is set up to communicate one way, from them to you. Next meet of you if you have a problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wendy Nola, it's such a good point. They need to get a little bit more personal. Wendy Nola is your consumer ninja.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Shapeshifters is brought to you by Volvo. It's safe to be brave with Volvo. Well, there are many routes that people take to becoming a shapeshifter, to doing what they do now. Some start hustling, some are almost born into it, some are almost forced into it. I think there are very few. I can't remember speaking to anyone or meeting anyone or even hearing of anyone who started as a chartered accountant, got the qualification, did all the work, worked in banks, did the whole corporate bit, 9 to 5 back then, and then decided, I'm actually going to go and start a beauty business, and done very well in it. Well, that's the journey that Matebe Ngwenya took. She became a CA, then founded Beauty on Tap. They produce all manner of beauty products. Well, Matebe is with us now. Matebe, good evening. It's wonderful that you've taken some time to join us on Shapeshifter this evening.
Good evening, Stephen, and thank you so much for having me, and evening to your listeners as well.
You did the whole corporate trip. I mean, you went to Wits, you studied accountancy. I can't think of anything harder to study. You worked at EY, you worked at Rand Merchant Bank, and then you decided, I'm going to do something else. I mean, what happened? What clicked in your head?
I think, Stephen, growing up, I kind of had like a knack for creativity. I loved creating. I loved using my hands. I was very much into fashion and hair. But I also had this mathematical side of me. And I think when it came to choosing careers, my accounting teacher in high school and my mom were just on my back saying, just do chartered accountancy. You're going to be guaranteed a job. There are very few Black female chartered accountants. And so between all the careers that I kind of had in my mind going through primary school all the way through to high school, I wanted to be a fashion designer, a doctor, and everything. Chartered accountancy just seemed like the best decision at the time. And I'm super grateful that I did follow that career because it's taught me so much in business as well. And so I went the whole CA route, went to Wits, did my articles at EY, even went on a secondment to Boston, and then came back to R&B. And that's when I kind of had Beauty on Tap kind of pop up in my head and went for it.
So I mean, was there one event that happened that made you go, oh, actually, I'd rather do this? Was it a process? I mean, sometimes you can have a bad week at work and realize, actually, that bad week's telling me something.
No, it wasn't anything like that. I actually loved banking. I always say to people, if I could go back to banking, I would, but I'm obviously so busy, so I can't. But it was just a friend getting married in Cape Town, and I was her maid of honor, and I was tasked with looking for a makeup artist in Cape Town. And at the time, Instagram wasn't as set to find kind of like a beauty supply or whatever it is that you need in a specific area. You kind of have to look through and just go through hordes and hordes of like beauty suppliers. And so that's when I just thought it would be really cool to have an application where you can search for beauty services in an area of your choice. And at the time, there were just so many local beauty brands that were like coming to the fore, but they didn't have the capital to be in your big beauty retailers. And so we had to find a product site, which then grew into an e-commerce website where people could then buy those products. So it all came about from just a need that friends and I had, and also just considering small beauty businesses. Like I had people who would come to my house and braid my hair as well. And I thought it'd be really cool if they had a digital shop front to kind of showcase their skills as well as products. And that's how Beauty on Tap was then born.
What kind of community were you growing up in? I mean, did you have, you spoke about sort of beauty, and I realized that's something that people don't learn formally. You kind of have it. You kind of grow up in it. Were you growing up in accountancy too?
Yes, my mom was an accountant. My dad was actually more of an IT guru. And so accounting was more natural for me and was something that I kind of knew. But my mom was also very entrepreneurial as well. Beauty, there was nobody who did beauty. I just used to look at like my mom and aunt and my mother and my grandmother, getting ready for work and, using nail polish and doing their hair. And that was more the passion side of it. It was just, I think every little girl looks at their mother figures getting ready for work and looking beautiful. So I was more pushed into the corporate side of things based on my family history and what people were doing in the family.
It sounds like your mother and, I presume other members of your family were very supportive through all of this. Clearly a big part of it and clearly had a big influence on you.
Yeah, so I think when it came to actually resigning, because I side hustled Beauty on Tap for 8 years before actually resigning and going full time into the business, I really had to prove to my mother that it can sustain me, because she was like, I'm very close to retirement. There's just no way in the world I can look after you if things don't work out. And so my mom was very pedantic that this has to stand on its own. It has to be able to pay me a salary that can give me the same lifestyle that I was kind of like affording myself when I was working at Rand Merchant Bank. And so everyone was super supportive. If I needed capital from my mom, she would be very giving. And I kind of say, I'll invest in your business and help you out. They'd help me pack orders when I was all by myself. And so everyone was pretty supportive within my family in making sure that Beauty on Tap becomes what it is today.
I was going to ask about capital because, and I've made this point so many times, whenever I speak to small business owners or people who've started something, they all say getting capital is the hardest problem. And often the biggest problem, and this continuing need for it, from one month to the next. Must have been a big help. Did you have to go elsewhere, or were your family able to help you with? And I just want to go back a little bit because you did it as a side hustle first, so you kind of knew what you were getting into.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I always say to people is, people always say, should I leave corporate as soon as I start a business or leave my job rather? And I always say with how hard it is to get capital in South Africa, rather bootstrap your business. So whatever extra money you have at the end of the month after paying all your bills, try and invest that into your business. I was very fortunate that I worked for RMB and, we got nice bonuses. I used to plug my bonuses into the business as well. And so from a funding perspective, I used my own salary and bonuses that I was saving to fund the business. And that's why I had to do it for 8 years and kind of side hustle it. And I think it's only during COVID that the business really, really took off. But for the first, 5 years? It was kind of like just trickling along and growing really slowly. And so I think also what was in my mind is people had already told me it's really difficult to get capital. And so I didn't really try to get it. I kind of just said, let me try do this on my own first and see how far I can get.
Deciding what to sell. I'm always interested in how shops decide I'm going to sell this, but I'm not going to sell that. What were the first sort of things that you were selling?
Sorry, Stephen, are you still there?
Yes, we are. Let me ask the question again. What were the first sort of product lines that you were selling? What were the first things that you actually made a sale of?
Yeah, so the entire ethos behind Beauty on Tap is to give the small beauty business a shop front, to give them access to our community. And so our focus is primarily on local beauty brands. And I always say to the team, let's strive to have 60% local brands on the platform before we consider international brands. And we've kind of tried to keep that ratio in place. And so we really focus on local brands. And so we have brands like Skin Functional, like Standard Beauty, Fundamentals, a whole lot of local brands on our website. And we also produce our own brands like Page Skincare and Bare Skincare as well. And then we basically look at brands, the big international brands, which we think are anchors as well for our store that bring people to the store and showcase the smaller brands. So we have your L'Oreal brands like La Roche-Posay, CeraVe. And then we also have Korean skincare. So we're very big on Korean skincare at the moment. That's what's kind of trending globally. But we obviously have to take care of our customers and community and making sure that we have reputable brands as well. So we're very strict with the kind of brands that we let into the store. They have to adhere to regulation in terms of healthcare regulation and SA as well. So it's a long kind of process, but we are trying to kind of push the local beauty brands being on the platform first.
You started to move into physical shops, physical stores as well. And it's quite interesting because lots of companies have started with a bricks and mortar store and then gone online. We're now seeing companies doing the opposite, and you're sort of one of them. How was that?
Looking back, it was actually a really smart decision because you accumulate all this data. I think we only opened our first brick and mortar store 7 years after operating. And so we know exactly where to open stores because we know where our customers are. We know what people are buying in certain areas. And so it was a very easy decision to make, but also difficult because I think during COVID, the chatter was that e-commerce is the new thing and that people are probably going to start closing their physical stores and moving more towards digital. And so when we kind of, considered should we open a store, it was 2022. And people were just like, are you really sure you want to do that since people are going digital? And we kind of didn't expect that a brick and mortar store would do so well. But I think people still want to experience beauty shopping in person, skincare shopping in person. They want to get advice from beauty consultants. And so the decision was easy to make, but still difficult because it was a really, really risky decision at the time to kind of take on.
It would require a lot more capital, right? You'd have to put a lot more money into it.
Definitely. Opening a store, I didn't think it would be that expensive because there were so many other costs that you don't consider. Like I hadn't considered the stock that we needed to open a store. We didn't think our store would do so well in the first month, and so that stock investment was so much higher than what we expected. But I was really lucky that at the time we had a track record, and our bankers gave us a loan to start off with. And then I think it was 50% bank funding, 50% equity. And since then, we've kind of been able to open our own stores just based on performance. We kind of take our time with opening stores. And so we've been really, really lucky that things have kind of worked out.
You posted on LinkedIn quite recently that it's important to put your hand up to get people to notice you. And there are lots of ways of looking at that. And I've spoken to, in some cases, people who actually started as accountants talking about being a black woman accountant, trying to be listened to, how important it is to be heard, to put your hand up as you use. Other people talk about leaning in, I think is the phrase. How difficult can that be to say, oi, look at me, listen to me, let me do this, I will do this for you?
I always say to young people, I think when people ask me how they can build their careers, I always say in corporate, put your hand up to do things. If it's things like social committees, put your hand up to get into social committees. Because I always say to them, the managers or the executives always come to the social committee at an event and say, well done, and want to get to know the people in these committees that are giving them a good time. So I always say to people, put your hands up for things like social committees. I was in the credit team at RMB and they needed a certain extra credit reports done at the end of each month. And I was like, it's fine, I'll do that report. And so I was very kind of actively involved in certain things. I got the opportunity to MC the conference. I think it was called the Strategy Conference, which then, exposed me to the executives of the bank and kind of helped me then move up to EA to the CEO of the bank as well. And so I always say to people, don't cower and be shy. Go to social events, meet managers, speak to them, get to know people beyond just work, and that kind of gives you a network, and that network has even helped me after RMB. So the people that I kind of got to know in corporate have really, really helped in helping grow my business as well. So it's really, really important for young people to do, and anyone to do in their careers as well.
Oh, in the army, people say in many armies, never volunteer for anything. You're saying actually to get ahead, you need to do the complete opposite. And I can understand that. You do need to get noticed.
Definitely. It's really, really aided me. As I always say to people, I wouldn't have been able to open the stores we've been able to open without the people that I worked with at RMB. They're able to vouch for me and say, Mateo she knows this, she's an accountant, she worked very well within our team. And so it really does open you up to a network that you can use throughout your lifetime.
We're speaking to Nqobile Ngwenya, the founder of Beauty on Tap. She's your shapeshifter on The Money Show tonight.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Speaking to Nqobile Ngwenya, the founder of Beauty on Tap. And Nqobile, obviously, when people start a small business, when they start a business at all, almost everything they've ever done in their working life helps them with what they're doing now. And obviously being a chartered accountant helped you in yours. I mean, famously, chartered accountants often become CEOs, and here you are.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually doing a talk at a psych event the other day, and I was talking about how things I learned all the way in first year articles are things I'm applying to my business today. Little things like ensuring cash recons are done and bank recons are done, controls and processes to make sure things don't go, wrong within the business has all kind of helped. Learning how to manage cash flows and cash flow projections and forecasting has been really important as well. And so everything I've learned from varsity, those heavy books we used to carry, all the way through to being an EA to a CEO, understanding, how to be a leader, how to lean into your empathetic side and being a leader has all helped. And so my corporate career has been fundamental in how I build the business and lead it as well. And it's been really important for me to have gone through that process first. And I always kind of reiterate that to other entrepreneurs as well.
To be an EA, I presume an executive assistant to a CEO in a big job must be really interesting practice. You get to watch a lot for when you're leading your own people. I mean, I presume you saw lots of things and you've been able to apply what works and avoid what doesn't work.
Yeah, I've always said that my journey has been very calculated. I think the universe conspired for me to see kind of everything first before going into Beauty on Tap full time. But everything from report writing to working on projects to attending, executive committees every month and preparing those board packs as well really kind of helped me understand my business a lot more as well. Understand what's needed in my business has helped me how to engage with stakeholders outside of my business as well. And so that role I did for 2 years. It was really demanding as well. That's why I kind of had to resign, because I was like, I can't do this role and lead Beauty on Tap at the pace that it's growing. But it was also really, really fundamental 2 years to running Beauty on Tap and kind of understanding leadership. And I think at the time I was an EA during COVID, a very, very important time as well in terms of empathy, leading a business through, a really difficult time. And so I was really, really lucky to get that experience.
And leading people now, and you're not just leading them, you're employing them. They rely on you. You rely on them too. Was that a big step for you? I mean, now it's not just that you're working in corporate and if something goes wrong or if you let the side down, someone else might pick it up, but people still get paid. It must be a different feeling now.
I think it's really kind of, I wouldn't say rewarding, but it's really interesting when you're growing a business with people that are employed by you, because they kind of also feel like it's their baby to grow as well, and they understand the vision. They're seeing the milestones, they're seeing the growth, they're involved in it. And so it kind of feels like a family-owned business, even though people, the majority those other people I've never met before. It's people that have kind of been brought into the business. And so they carry the business as their baby as well, just because it's still young, it's still growing. So it's been really kind of interesting leading, a growing business where we're opening stores all together and learning all together as well. I think when we opened the first store, none of us knew how retail works, brick and mortar retail. And so learning together has also kind of been really special. So they kind of carry it as their own baby as well.
When you look at the business now, and it's been running for a while, it's grown, you've got physical stores, people are sort of noticing. And beauty, the beauty business in South Africa is massive. It's massive. And you look at it's intensely competitive. Is it difficult to sort of stand out against really big name brands that are trying to do all sorts of things?
I think the one thing that we've been very pedantic about is not building a customer base, but building a community. And that's kind of led our marketing strategy, is to just understand people, understand the consumer, understand what they want first. And we're not selling to people. We're just trying to teach people about beauty, about ingredients. We listen to our community. That's how we're able to then come up with our own brands, in-house brands that we keep exclusive to Beauty on Tap as well. And so I think our strategy in being a brand that listens to its community and focuses more on building a community than a customer base has really kind of paid off. And I think that's kind of what has differentiated us within the market. And so I think also just the kind of brands that we stock has been very different as well to what your other big retailers stock as well. And that's going to be our strategy going forward. And I think also just having our own in-house brands, that are well marketed and have been well received in the market as well, has been really important in kind of anchoring them in the store and bringing customers to the store then.
Trust is really important in the beauty business, right? People feel that, I mean, this is something they put on themselves. It's a very almost intimate thing. Like the trust, the brand, all of that matters, I think, more than it does with, I don't know, pens.
Definitely. That's why we're so pedantic about the kind of brands that we put onto the website, because we know that once somebody puts something on their face or on their body, it has to check out. It has to be safe. We have to make sure that these are brands that are tested in labs, brands that we can go back to and, if somebody has an issue, are able to answer on that issue and give us feedback that we can then share with the customer as well. And so I think that's why we have such stringent rules in terms of what we sell. We have relationships directly with brands, even if it's international brands. We have, I think maybe with K-Beauty brands, we have one distributor who's an official distributor, but that's why it's really important for us as well to work directly with brands to make sure that we're selling authentic skincare and skincare that can be trusted by people as well. So that is super important as well. There've been a few issues being raised over the past few months with people, saying certain platforms are selling fake skincare, and we just want to be very, very clear that we make sure that everything we sell is authentic.
Motebe Ngwenya, thank you so much. Really appreciated talking to you on The Money Show and being our shapeshifter, the founder of Beauty on Tap.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
That's it for The Money Show. Back tomorrow. Good evening, 8 o'clock.